or the right to repair, or managing waste, or simply community well-being, all of that is really, really essential to driving good legislation. So I was thinking, how can we take those good ideas and turn them into legislation to ensure we've got thriving communities, healthy nature, and drive real climate action? So that's what this session's about. It's about how we can explore that. And I want it. Gareth and I haven't had a chance to talk about how we're going to run it, but I'm really keen for it to be an interactive session, because this is about ensuring everyone's got tools and understanding to take ideas and turn them into something. So I'll quickly run through my understanding, and I'm new to this. Gareth's been doing it a lot, so I'm going to give you my version, and I'd encourage Gareth to jump in and talk about what happens. But essentially, if we want to think about how things work at Parliament, I look at politicians firstly as not independent, but as the tip of the spear, and the tip of the spear can really pierce the target when it's propelled by a shaft of community and Māori support, while it's got that heft behind it. So what happens if we think about bills, members' bills that can change legislation? Parliament makes legislation, but it also scrutinises government activity through select committee work, and so can draw on community expertise, and also represents the community. So as members of Parliament, we should be responsible and responsive to the communities we represent. So that means that we should be listening to ideas, and we should be able to turn good ideas into something useful to change things. So coming back to what a member's bill would look like, that's an idea. And when an idea gets born, and wherever it gets born, if it comes to me or someone in the Green Party, we take it to caucus, and as an idea, as a rough idea, and there it gets a yay or a nay to proceed to development or not. And that it will get approval. It will likely get approval if it fits our policy, and it looks as though it's a good thing and a good time. So it gets taken in charge by a member who uses the resources of Parliament and the resources within the party to develop a bill, and develop it into a way that it can be lodged. And then there are several ways in which a bill can develop. The main way is being put into the biscuit tin, and it gets drawn out at some point and debated in the House. Once it goes into the biscuit tin, it then becomes public, as I understand it, so everyone can see everyone in Parliament can see what it's about, and can debate it and engage with it. And then it might win more support before it actually gets pulled and discussed. But it also, there's another way of doing it, and that's to gain really broad support across Parliament. 61 votes, I understand, but that hasn't been done yet. So that's a tricky one. That's about building consensus within Parliament. Or it could be seen as such a good idea by the government of the day that they adopt it as one of their own and implement it. So essentially, a member's bill is an idea to change things, to improve or to introduce new legislation to make something happen. And there are different pathways to get it through, but once it gets into a process, away it goes. The hidden part of all of that is all of the community support that it can have behind it. All of the things that encourage politicians to take notice of this bill because they think it will have public support. So that's the other part that I think we really need to join up, not just thinking about a bill to make something happen, not just passing something on and saying, here we go, get that done, or be disappointed when it doesn't work, but think about how political representation can support Māori and community effort and keep pushing. And if we think about the container return scheme, yes, that failed, but it's now a piece of legislation that exists, or that could be reintroduced. And we know that there is massive community support for it. So it's not as if legislation, if it fails at the first hurdle, is dead and gone. It's still able to be reintroduced, and it's still something that a movement can be supported around or behind. So the big thing that we've got is an ability to connect and to make something happen. And I'm really, really keen to work on the energy side of things. If the portfolios are attributed in the way I hope they will be, and we don't know yet, so I'm not gonna jump the gun. But you know, there's a real need for transparent electricity pricing and a proper hedge market, so that we can have, as Gareth would say, cheaper, cleaner, smarter power available to all. And there's many things that we know need to be done that have emerged out of the community sector. So that's a really brief overview of how things work. And now I just want to head over to Gareth and ask for some of his experience in taking ideas and making them real. Gareth, I don't know if you want to jump in here.
Yeah, cool. Kia ora, Scott, and kia ora, everyone. Namahi nui kia koutou kia ora. E whana mai o te taha o te awa Tairawhiti Gisborne, I raro o te maunga Kaiti, Hiuri ahau no Wales, Scotland, ki te noho o ke Poneke, Wellington, ko Gareth Hughes, toko ingoa. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today, and it's a huge privilege to follow Scott. I'm absolutely rapt that he's in Parliament, and it feels wonderful to feel like you're represented there. So it's huge congratulations again, Scott. And I just think it's absolutely wonderful. I've got a few thoughts maybe just to follow on from what you've been saying, Scott. I think that was a really good sort of overview and covering of the issues. I thought maybe I'd give a few examples from where it's worked, and maybe just a little bit more detail on some of the issues. But if you'd indulge me, I know you're thinking about systems change, and I'd love to show you a little model that I've just found, if it's possible for me to share my screen. So is that possible? Looks like it's possible.
It's right now.
Can you see a graph? Awesome. So I've just come across this model. It's called the 3 Horizons model from Bill Sharp, and I'm absolutely in love with it and think it's a wonderful way to think about systems change. So hopefully you can see it okay. I've got the Zoom stuff blocking my view, but at the bottom on that axis, we've kind of got the present system, the future system that perhaps we're all working towards, and the transition zone in the middle. On the y-axis is kind of viability. You could also think of the x-axis as kind of like time, effectively. If you look at that red line, this is where we are now. It's business as usual, you know, the current status quo. This is called the first horizon. Given the unsustainable nature of it, I think we'd all like to imagine that this current horizon is going to tail off and change in the future. You can see the third horizon, that green line, which is, you know, the future system we might like to see. I think what's quite interesting, however, is you'll note that it's not starting from zero. There are examples, I like to call them green shoots, of this future system already present in our society under the current status quo. And part of our job is to transition to move towards it. And that's where the second horizon comes in, the sort of period of transition. This idea originally comes from sort of the corporate management world, but it's been adapted by Bill Sharp from a systems perspective. And sort of in business world, this is innovation. You know, companies are coming up with, let's say the first horizon is CDs and tapes, and the third horizon is Spotify. That second horizon is maybe like the MIDI disc, right, where you can have a CD, you know, in a Walkman on your pocket. That was something new. It had some benefits. However, it was kind of H2, Horizon 2 minus, in the sense that it kept that world of the CDs still there. It was supporting that old normal. However, you might look at, say, the iPod, right? A new way that you could have music in your pocket, but it was also moving us towards that transition of the world of Spotify. Why I love this is it's questioning ourselves as we're innovating, as we're experimenting, as we're starting projects to get toward the third horizon that are currently in the second horizon. Are we working on H2 minus projects, which are actually just prolonging and maintaining the current system? Or are we working on H2 plus projects, which are changing the system and moving us towards this different end system state? So I'll stop sharing now. Hopefully, I just found that's really fascinating. And that's sort of my work now with the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. I've spent nearly a quarter century now campaigning with Greenpeace and Parliament and other organizations for good change, and realizing a lot of that work's been focused entirely on the symptoms. If we don't get the systemic drivers of these problems caused, and I reflect everything I've done from conservation to dolphins to oil drilling to rental standards, are economic issues. So that's why my mahi now is focused on redesigning our economic system so it delivers well-being for people and planet by default. I absolutely endorse what Scott said around sort of politicians are responsive to change. Often they're the ones who get to vote to finish something that a movement started many years. And often they get all the glory and the kudos and the front page of the paper, but often it's only come about because of the hard mahi of people over many years. I've asked this question to thousands of people, I'd wager now. Give me an example from history where politicians or a government has altruistically done the right thing with zero community pressure. And I'm yet to find a single example from history. Change has always happened because people got organized, people campaigned, people built movements. So politicians aren't the be-all and end-all. No disrespect, Scott. They're the finishers. But I think also politicians that you can build relationships can be strong partners for a movement for positive change. So when I think of sort of my decade in Parliament, some of the best relationships I had with organizations were we both were able to get something out of it, in the sense I was helping support the kaupapa of that organization, and they were providing me information and tools and ammunition, frankly, for the work and the changing the discourse in Parliament. So politicians can be incredible partners and allies and powerful support for the work that you're doing. One example that springs to mind is I was recently contacted by Green Building Council, who said a question I had asked to David Parker in the House around energy efficient standards for commercial buildings had sort of, just by asking that question, the officials were in a flurry to try and get to the answer, and that absolutely catalyzed and sped up their thinking and led to real change. You might think them providing a couple of questions to me in Parliament, which hardly anyone watches, wouldn't make a difference, but here's a tangible example where it has led to policy changes in the real world, and there's plenty of examples like that. So the ability to ask questions to ministers in the House really does get the gears of government moving and really focuses their attention. Politicians can ask questions for written answer. These are similar to Official Information Act requests, but they have to be answered within 5 working days. So they're incredibly powerful because you get real information from what's happening within the government and the bureaucracy incredibly fast. And there's quite strict rules around ministers not being able to avoid them, which we know there's so many tricks and tools to get around Official Information Act requests. And many politicians, well, I can only really speak for the Greens, love working with community partners to lodge those questions and get them to you. The Member of Parliament also gets the answer a day before they go up on the website and are shared publicly. These can be fantastic tools to get media coverage of an issue because you can give it to a journalist as an exclusive. Only you have that information. One of the greatest perks I found of being a politician was access to the Parliamentary Library. These are a team of amazing researchers who support MPs in their work. Their access to data, information, analysis is really wonderful. So again, I can't speak for politicians, but I saw myself as a bit of a facilitator when I was in Parliament, supporting groups that I had relationships with to maybe access that research from the Parliamentary Library. And sure, we shouldn't do it and we shouldn't be promoting it, but it is a powerful tool that MPs can support community groups. MPs also, you know, part of the role isn't just in the House. It should be their role as, you know, providing accountants, of the public service through select committees, you know, reviewing legislation, accountability functions when it comes to the public service. So again, working with a member of Parliament to ask pertinent questions to your cause in a select committee can get media coverage, can really drive the work of officials, and can be really powerful. I know you're really focused on members' bills, and we've seen, you know, massive change in our past from, you know, homosexual decriminalisation to marriage equality come through the cookie tin, which Scott talked about. I think it's a wonderful quirk of our Parliament that, you know, most of Parliament's marble and beautiful carved, you know, historic artifacts. However, we've got a cookie tin from Decca that this momentous legislation has come out of. There are three types of ways that laws can be passed in New Zealand. The most common is a government bill. The second is a local bill where councils can effectively send legislation up to Parliament, relatively rare. And the third way is a members' bill where each non-executive, non-ministerial member of Parliament is entitled to put one bill in the cookie tin, and there are rules around, I think it's 7 members' bills can be on the order paper, awaiting a vote or a debate in Parliament before another one gets pulled. So sometimes you can go months without any members' bills being pulled, and sometimes because of the sort of the logjam of the House, you can have like maybe 4 or 5 members' bills pulled on a single day. Members' days, I believe, are fortnightly on Wednesday, sort of alternates, and that's a day dedicated for the debate and voting on members' bills. An interesting standing orders or parliamentary rule change I managed to get through before I left Parliament was that there's a new way that members' bills can reach the floor of the House. Traditionally, it was that cookie tin, and that's still the way that it works. However, I found it frankly ridiculous that things like marriage equality, where there was a majority of politicians' support for it, had to wait for the luck of the draw to get to the floor of Parliament. There's a new mechanism in the rules whereby if a certain number of non-ministerial MPs sign a bit of paper showing it's got support, it can automatically go to the floor of the House. Unfortunately, this new mechanism hasn't been utilised yet because both Labour and National effectively have vetoed the other side from utilising it. And I hope one day we'll see, you know, a member of Parliament be able to advance and get something that has support across the line, which would be so much more efficient and faster and, I think, frankly, democratic. I'd also like to just, before I talk about maybe members' bills in a little bit more detail, is just highlight the importance of regulation. It's not very sexy and not very exciting, but actually this is the engine room of government in New Zealand. We have incredibly powerful regulatory powers in our governmental system. What I mean by this is, sure, laws are the law of the land, legislation is incredibly important. In many laws in New Zealand, significant decisions are delegated to what's called secondary legislation or regulation. Basically, a minister is delegated the powers under a law to make really important decisions by a thing called ordinary council. You'd come across regulation in lots of your daily lives. Parliament now has a beefed up regulatory review committee and is now providing more scrutiny of regulation, just noting that all the attention historically in Parliament has gone on legislation, yet this incredibly important tool, regulation, hasn't had the appropriate level of scrutiny. With my chairpersonship of SAFE, working on the regulatory review committee, we've seen significant changes for animal welfare in this country. And we're now seeing a major review of animal welfare regulations as a result of changes in that regulatory review committee. It could actually be some of the most fundamental changes we'll see, and it's happening in kind of quite a boring under the radar sense, but it's incredibly powerful and a tool that I'd urge you to consider. You know, who's on the regulatory review select committee in Parliament? How can you make submissions or follow the work there? So when it comes to private members' bills, you know, we've seen some major wins such as marriage equality. I think, you know, that came about obviously because of a concerted and organised campaign. What was different about that is they started, instead of a single member of parliament drafting a law and wanting to push it, that was a cross-party group of MPs, Kevin Haig, Nikki Kay, and others from different parties that worked together to draft the legislation and build not consensus, maybe unanimity within their parties. And that was incredibly powerful. I keep saying that, but that cross-party approach before even the legislation was put in the cookie tin was incredibly successful. The Zero Carbon Act is another example that wasn't through a members bill, but through a government bill where cross-party support was garnered before the legislation went to the House. And sadly, that's one of the only examples we've seen, of parties actually working together and getting consensus in legislation. I think we're really missing a trick not using that in everything from environmental rules to infrastructure planning and other areas. A members bill that I passed was country of origin food labelling. You'll see that you can work out what country your food's coming from now when you look at the label, which you couldn't a few years ago, because of a members bill that Stephen Browning put in and I managed to carry through the House. That's a good example of working with a constituency. In this case, it was growers, the organic sector and others in New Zealand, getting the luck of the draw, getting it pulled from the House, working with other parties to get a first reading vote. As you'll know, laws go through three readings or votes in Parliament and a select committee process before they are signed by the Governor-General and become law. In that case, a majority of votes had only agreed to support it to the first reading. They wanted to see the evidence that was garnered in the select committee phase and all the submissions before parties put their votes in. In that select committee phase, I responded to what I heard from different stakeholders and submitters. I ended up modifying the legislation, weakening it to some degree, but then at the 11th hour, I was able to massively beef it up by including pork, which is a longer story for another day. But then working with the other parties, getting their buy-in in the select committee room meant that I was able to guarantee on their votes in the subsequent readings, and that passed. The last example that I've been a part of that I'd like to share was around regulation, maybe just to highlight how important it is. Under New Zealand's fisheries management rules, this is in the early 2010s, I knew that New Zealand would be looking at our 5-yearly review of shark policies. New Zealand was an outlier that we were still allowing shark finning, and many other countries had banned it at that point. So I ended up working and helping catalyze a coalition of environmental and conservation organisations that came together and formed the New Zealand Shark Alliance. And we were able to convince a national government back then to change the National Plan of Action sharks and effectively ban shark finning in New Zealand. Again, it wasn't law, it was a regulatory change, just to stress how powerful that was. So that's a quick summary of the types of legislations, how members' bills have been used very successfully. I would say there's a great opportunity with such a large Green and Te Pāti Māori bloc in Parliament in opposition to get members' bills through. I think Labour also has a bit of an opportunity. I'll put on my political commentator's hat on here. I think in the last 3 years, they've been a little bit directionless on policy and values and exactly where they're trying to take this country, sort of being all over the show on environmental and climate issues, wealth issues, etc. They're really going to have to be introspective over the next 3 years. And I think as environmental and community groups, we've got an opportunity to work with Labour and maybe, I don't want to sound paternalistic, but help them find clearer policies that will actually deliver for the environment and climate and other areas like child poverty and inequality. They, I think, need the support, and that's an opportunity for you to work and us to work with Labour politicians, maybe give them good questions to be asking, good advice, good areas to be focused on, good ideas for private members' bills, etc. I was also going to talk about petitions, but I feel like I've yabbered on for too long. So happy to maybe take any questions around that process if anyone would like. But thanks again for the opportunity to contribute today.
Thanks, Gareth. And that's fantastic and a really rich, deep overview. And I just I thought there's a few questions in the chat, but I also want us to think about what we're doing in a pre-Hui, because as Gareth pointed out, the Gen Zero did a lot of work as a collective before the Zero Carbon Act was established, and worked with different parties to make sure something would happen. What Gen Zero was a large group and built allies, and what the community, the Strengthening Communities Hui is a gathering of 3 different networks once a year that is a massive collective. But then you go away again, and you all work in small member organizations, frustrated. Well, I used to be sending submissions in, trying to make stuff happen, trying to talk to the right people. And it's not called lobbying, it's just called advocacy from a place of knowledge and experience, I'd argue. Liana, I think you've said. So I want us to think about what you want to achieve at the Strengthening Communities Hui, because there will be a lot of people joining up who have an ability to shape things as a collective, and the power of the collective is much greater than the single organizations that you are when you go home. So the other side of that is that you've not just got the power of the collective at that moment. You've also got the people that are situated in Wellington who might be channels to talk to the different politicians to take a big idea or a collective idea and keep pushing on it. Just keep nudging and keep talking to the right people to make something happen. So all of that stuff that can happen in Parliament, and Gareth did right. I have been amazed at, having worked in the community sector for so long, being able to go to the Parliament Library and say, can I find out about the Energy Hardship Expert Panel report and recommendations, please? And Gareth had already put in an OIA on that, Gareth Cartwright, and lo and behold, it popped out yesterday. Can we find out about the Community Energy Fund? There is so much resource that I have access to that I didn't have access to before, and I want to be able to use that to ensure that we are interrogating government when it's making bad decisions, being able to work and draw on your expertise when we're sitting in select committee working on the curly questions and the difficult problems. So this is the thing that we can do when we're in government or in Parliament, in opposition, when we have a bit more time as well, when we're in opposition, to use it profitably and to hear and listen to our communities to make sure that we're representing them when we're working on legislation or when we're working in select committees. So that's enough, I think, from Gareth and I to talk at you. There's a number of questions. Do people just want to go from the top and jump in?
Because well, I might jump in there, Scott. Yeah. And what I might do is, there are a couple of questions, but I think, Gareth, you did just talk about petitions, and a number of people were like, yes, please talk about petitions. So should we jump into that one first?
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Georgina. Just to start, maybe that first question around timing, there isn't really any benefit. One of the first things Parliament will do when it resumes is do a continuation motion. Basically, all the business the previous Parliament will carry over. So all those members' bills will be where they are currently. And if that MP has left Parliament, just a new MP will pick it up. However, I would note that, it takes a long time to draft legislation. And again, MPs can use the Parliamentary Council Office to support them drafting. So if you've got an idea, get started. It can take months for it to get drafted and get in the ballot, and maybe you could be waiting months again afterwards. It's also good just to have a maybe perhaps a members' bill drafted and in your pocket. If there's something topical on the issue that it relates to that's in the media, you can pull that out and get another sort of media cycle on the back, highlighting the solution. Just lastly on members' bill, I'd also add that I believe in the future we're going to see more participatory approaches for drafting members' bills. I launched the country's first ever crowdsourced members' bill. This was around internet rights in the mid-2010s. It didn't pass Parliament, didn't get pulled from the cookie tin, but I think more and more we'll see MPs use participatory processes to draft them. So maybe that's another way that the groups could be involved, is working with a Hui and maybe a process to draft that legislation. So quickly on petitions, really powerful tools, have driven change in the past, but I think it's just important to be realistic about them. So a petition basically is a simple question with people signing their name to it, which is submitted to the Clerk of Parliament, and then, not always, but normally goes in front of a select committee. Since I left Parliament, there's been a new select committee, a new petition select committee introduced, which is meant to triage the massive petitions that select committees get to then focus on the most important ones. I actually don't know how that's working. So that's a change from when I was there. But I think it's fair to say that petitions politicians approach them quite cynically, if I'm honest. Often the politics of the different parties in a select committee doesn't mean they get a particularly fair hearing. People approach the question from their partisan approach, and we've got one of the most whipped parliaments in the world. And what I mean by that is, unlike the UK, for example, where MPs often speak out independently of their party, we've got a culture where MPs just don't criticise or question their party or vote against them. So really, you're dealing with a party system rather than individual MPs in reality. The most effective way that change theoretically can happen is what's called a citizens-initiated referendum. This is a formal petition where you get 10% of the adult enrolled population to sign their name within 12 months. And that initiates a referendum, a vote of every citizen in this country. I think we've had 4 in New Zealand's history. I was involved with the anti-electricity privatisation petition. However, I believe all 4 petitions that have forced a referendum have been ignored by the government of the day. So they haven't been a particularly powerful tool to make change. They've been an incredibly powerful mobilising tactic, ability to get contacts, maybe building email lists if you get approval. But there's no guarantee that a petition will see effective change by the government. I've seen petitions with 10 people signing that make more change than a petition that I was involved with to stop sow crates, where you cage up mother pigs for months on end, with 120,000 signatures make change. But again, petitions are powerful tools to drive mobilisation, build contacts, and build a movement. But if you're really interested less so in that than more sort of substantive change, please don't discount how powerful a letter can be to a select committee. I've seen simple letters with a reasonable case and a sort of clear call to action really catalyse MPs to get their heads together and start a process around a select committee table. Select committees can, they've got the powers to initiate inquiries, which are very formal. They've got the ability to what's called open a briefing. This allows them to bring in expert witnesses, to bring in stakeholders, even ask for submissions on the topic that they've opened the briefing into. They can then issue a report. And if you get a select committee publishing a report that has consensus of all the political parties saying X and Y needs to change, that's a really great way that you can encourage the government to finally do a members bill or make a regulatory change. So petitions are a powerful tool, but also don't discount just the ability of writing a letter to a minister's office or a select committee can really make change as well.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
There was just a quick question going back a little bit around the private members bills around getting the media involved. Do you want to tackle that one, Gareth?
Yeah, I think it's probably just contextual on the issue and the time. Imagine we were doing an innovative participatory process to develop a members bill. You'd probably want media involved from the start because it's really cool and exciting. However, getting media for, say, launching a members bill, probably 9 out of 10 journalists, when you call them saying, hey, I'm about to launch a members bill, they'll say, call me back when it's pulled from the ballot. So sometimes there's just no interest in it anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'd add to that the way I see this working most effectively is in joining the dots. So I have a members bill that I'm wanting to put forward, and I'm working on with, and I think Bill's on the call, and I've been talking to quite a number of people about transparent electricity pricing bill. And tomorrow I'll be receiving the homegrown energy bill petition from 350.org on the steps of Parliament. So that's a little media moment that will then be recreated as another media moment that will be a precursor to the members bill that will go in. And what we're trying to do there is build up a group of stories that the media they're not just being fed something, they'll develop an interest in and will make it bigger. And there's that network behind the bill. So it's sort of like it's joining forces. It's not sending out something and hoping it gets a hit. It's joining forces so that it becomes an organic media moment and more than just a moment, a story that they can keep following. That's the way I envisage media working to enable legislation.
Right, thanks, Scott.
Just super quickly, if I may, George, is one of the risks as well is that I mean, you can approach a members bill in a flashy way that's just designed to get media attention, or sort of a more substantive way where you're genuinely trying to make change. If you launched a members bill and you didn't talk to other political parties, I don't think you're really building a movement towards it if you're doing that. But also you've got the very real risk that party who's never had any time to think about the issue or the proposal just flat out rules it out. And once they're in the media saying we're not supporting something, it's very hard to change their mind. So it's easier to persuade people behind closed doors than when a TV camera's in your face.
Yeah, I'll talk about that. It's really, there's the work that we do to make something happen. And so there's almost two strategies. If we know something's not going to happen, but it needs to be talked about publicly, that's a really good way to use media to build profile, even if we know it's not going to go through. Because sometimes the mahi takes years, but it's got to be done. But the other side of it is, as Gareth said, sometimes you need to build the relationships quietly and let media find out about them and work on it. So there's those two different strategies depending on what you want to achieve.
So on that note, I am just going to also mihi to Ian Lees-Galloway, who was previously also an MP, and I used to work with Ian a long time ago in student politics. So lovely to have him on the call. It's nice to have some history with some of our guests today. Ian, do you just want to comment on, Labor is going to spend 3 years reflecting and thinking about what's going to happen in 3 years' time. In terms of what Scott and Gareth are saying in terms of that collaborative effort and maybe going to other political parties, do you have any thoughts on that, and any comments on anything you've heard today? Because it's always great to have other perspectives. So thanks for being on the call in your role as AFRA.
Kia ora, George. Thank you, and kia ora koutou. Apologies for not having my video on. My connection's a bit iffy at this end, so just trying to stay connected with you all. Look, I think one of the tactics that hasn't been spoken about, but which will be really relevant with Labour, is engaging with the political parties, right? Yeah, so you've got the politicians in Parliament, but then you've got this whole political party that I'm guessing many people on this call are members of various political parties, and they will have their own processes about developing their policy and developing the specific pieces of legislation that they want to support and promote. So that's another avenue for getting policy progress. And it is, again, just like everything, it's something which takes a lot of time, has to be advocated for. The advocates for particular policy positions within parties have to win the argument within their party, so they need a lot of support as well. And yeah, obviously Labour, yesterday Chris Hipkins said we start with a blank sheet of paper. They are obviously very open-minded to policy proposals that help them articulate their values in a clearer way. Look, as a Labour Party member myself, I absolutely agree with everything Gareth said about them being a bit lost at sea over the last 3 years. And there will be lots of members in that party who really want to help the party get back on track and have a much clearer articulation of what it stands for. And lots of the things that I know that people on this group will want to promote will fall on fertile ground inside the Labour Party. So you need to, just like you need to find your allies and advocates inside Parliament, you need to find your allies and advocates inside parties. And that might be MPs, but it might be other people with power and influence inside parties as well. So that's a really important avenue, speaking particularly to that question with Labour. And yeah, it's a rich environment for proposing new ideas. The frame for Labour will be, this will help you demonstrate where you stand in the political spectrum, what you stand for, what your values are in the 21st century, and yeah, will help you reach out to those people who left you on in every direction at this election. They've got a bit of a task on their hands because they lost people to the centre, they lost people to the left, they lost people to Pāti Māori. So they've got to figure out, there's quite a few different constituencies they need to reach out to. But I think the reason they lost on all fronts is because they did look lost and it was really unclear what they stood for. So they'll be looking for something around that. Just a general comment on the specific tactics that have been talked about, like things like petitions and members' bills, and then there's there's the relationship building. It's really important to have a clear strategy and a clear sense of what your objectives are. So Scott talked about sometimes a members' bill might be actually about trying to effect change and win the majority in Parliament and get that legislation passed. Sometimes it might be just about promoting the idea and progressing the idea, knowing you're going to lose the vote, but you're going to get an opportunity to talk about things. Petitions, as Gareth said, not necessarily a great way to affect change, but they are, look, this might sound cynical, but they're a great way to build a list of allies. People are literally giving you their name and their email address. That is a great way of building a list of allies so that you're building your base out there in the public for future fights. So these different tactics, they often have they can often achieve things that's not what's written on the tin. Petitions are supposed to be about getting good recommendations from a select committee and getting the government to change their mind. Members' bills are supposed to be about changing the law, but actually there's other things they can achieve as well that help you in the longer term. So I think about that. And my last comment would be, it is really important to have relationships with both the government and the opposition, regardless of who the government and the opposition is. Government backbenchers can go and have quiet conversations with ministers in the caucus room and help you get your message across that way. And if government backbenchers get a feeling that there's a public mood in favour of something and that might have some impact on their electoral fortunes at the next election, then they're going to have those conversations with ministers. Opposition MPs, on the other hand, are looking for rallying calls to motivate the public and to hold the government to account. They can bang the drum a little bit more, ask those questions in the House, get the media. So everybody has a different role to play, and it's really important to build those trusted relationships with people. And it does mean sometimes reaching out to folks that we don't agree with on a lot of things. But if you can build a trusted relationship with them, then you can actually work all parts of Parliament. And again, it's about having a strategy, understanding what you're trying to achieve, and deploying all the different tactics that are available to you to get there. And a lot of patience.
You're muted, Georgina.
Thanks, Scott. I was just saying thank you, Ian. I think that's a really good addition to what we've heard. And I was just going to refer to one of the questions I don't think we have answered, which was about the realistic time frame. And I'm pretty sure the answer is going to be a piece of string, depending on the context. But Gareth, do you want to try and tackle that one?
Thanks, George. Was this the question around timing, or how?
I think it was a Gareth question, so sorry about that. And sorry, not you, Gareth. A realistic time frame for a big win. So let's say you were going to build up this movement. You've got something really great. What's realistic for kind of the woe to go?
Well, it's a piece of string one. I mean, I'd love to say a year, but realistically, it probably takes a bit longer than that.
And then I guess, of course, once it gets put into legislation, often there is those, once it actually starts to be realistic in the community, that's often quite a time lag, isn't it?
That's right. I mean, like a bill can take, 12 months to go through Parliament. Can obviously happen faster with urgency, but that's incredibly rare. And then often bills don't actually come into effect some months away in the future. So yeah, it can take a long time.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really important is to realize that we're all part of creating change, and that the effect that we have will be felt when we see something happen, and we know our part that we've played in it, whether it is circulating a petition, whether it is having a conversation with a colleague, whether it is ensuring that you've had a workshop and got people together, whether it is presenting a politician with a petition, or whether it's you're delivering it as a member's bill. It's all part of a systemic change that we're contributing to, and sometimes we won't get it through at the first go, but that doesn't mean it stops. It means we then regroup and we try again. So this isn't a one-off, and it's not looking for the quick fix. And I'm really mindful that I don't want to give anyone the expectation that you are now going to have to do a heck of a lot of work to shake things up into the perfect thing and then deliver it to us. That's not the way it goes. It's really taking your expertise and doing something with it when you want us to do something with it. And it's knowing that when there's a select committee on whatever, we can draw on your expertise at a time to ask the right questions, because if we're not doing the mahi, we may not be able to ask the right questions. And I had a really interesting briefing from the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment last week at talking about select committees, and the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment writes reports, really good reports. I'm sure a number of you read them, but doesn't always formally submit. And he mentioned that, I think it was the primary industry select committees, that the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment just proposed a series of questions to ask at that event, on that select committee, which enabled a deeper investigation of the issue. So sometimes it's just being able to ask the right questions, which is the really important thing. And I think, Liana, you've got a real fascinating job at the Hui of drawing together all these streams and strings and bits and pieces to build a collective picture of how we're going to make it work.
I think that's a perfect way to finish. That's what this is all about, getting our thinking juices going and drawing into that Tuesday of the Hui. Liana does have a great job, but we know Liana, and she is up for the task. So I'm just going to say thank you so much for all of you for being here and listening. I know there's quite a few of us that have really enjoyed this, and we're really excited about some of the mahi going forwards, both probably from individual organisations, but also as networks, and what we can do to support a lot of this work. So thank you to our guests. Thank you to Scott for your time. I know that it's been a really busy few weeks for you. And Gareth, something I really enjoyed about was hearing about all of the successes. Sometimes we forget to celebrate those things, and marriage equality, country of origin labelling, banning shark finning, the Carbon Zero Act. It's really great to have a reminder of those things that that have been achieved. So thank you for all of your mahi as well. So I'm just going to do a karakia to finish us off, and I'll let you go back to your Wednesdays. Ka whakairia te tapu, kia wā te ai te ara, kia turiki whakataha ai, kia turiki whakataha ai. Huia taiakia. Thank you for being with us. We will send out some notes and a recording of this in due time, but have a lovely day and thank you for your attendance. Ka kite.